So Seattle, I ask you to please raise your voice and join me in welcoming Shaun King.
Seattle, what's up? Gordon, where are my flowers, man? Where are my flowers? Everybody got flowers but me. I started counting the bouquets, and I realized a few minutes ago there would be no flowers for me. Before I get started, can we put our hands together for Gordon, who's a world-class leader leading this organization? Put your hands together for Gordon and the great work he does. Thank you, Gordon. Deeply, deeply honored to be here with you all. I don't know if you know this about me, but I love Seattle so much. It's one of my favorite cities in the world, and I find myself coming back here all the time. I think this is maybe the 5th time I've been to Seattle in the past few months, and it's always a breath of fresh air. And there's so much that I want to tell you and talk to you about in the short time that we have. But Susan, I love your story of perseverance. Thank you so much for sharing your heart and doing it with such enthusiasm, which is just contagious. And I do hope that all of you have completed that envelope. I asked myself, no one asked me to do any fundraising today, but for those of you who for various reasons could not do it today or have not done it, you could also do it online. And Susan asked that you do $20, but I've looked around the room, and many of you can do far more than that. And some of you, 20 may be a stretch, but I would ask that many of you push it almost until it's uncomfortable, because we live in a time, and this is not news to you, you know this, maybe better than almost anybody in the country. I feel like Seattle really has the heartbeat of America right now. You understand that we live in deeply problematic times. And there's so much that causes us to be unsure about where we are as a nation daily. Every day causes so many of us to lose confidence in the safety and security and stability of things that we've come to rely on. When we see Meals on Wheels being cut from the budget, or literally, I saw they did a video of Elmo getting fired this week. And I saw it, and it was deeply powerful, but also incredibly painful. Like PBS produced it. Like dealing with the reality that that's what we're facing. Just a peculiar time. And in this time, there are a few things that you can give to that you know will make a difference. And solid ground is one of those things, that when you give $1, you know that they're going to take that dollar and multiply it and impact real people's real lives. And so I thank all of you who've made that donation possible. Thank you all. Yeah, step it up. Also, many of you will have conversations in the days and weeks ahead, and I hear these conversations happening all over the country, where people will ask you, where should I be giving my money right now? That's a question I hear all over the place, because as people look at budgets being slashed, as people look at proposals and budget proposals, people want to know, like, where can I give that makes a difference? And I hope that each and every one of you will see yourselves as ambassadors for solid ground and for the work that they're doing. And I hope that you can even rehearse in your mind what it is that solid ground does, and so that you can communicate to people, yeah, I know a place that's worth donating to, that's worth giving to. And if each of you in the room do that, it will increase this organization's capacity to serve the city and make a huge difference. I got a chance, I don't know how many of you were there, but I got a chance to speak at an International Women's Day event here in Seattle. And one of the things that I said there, and I want to repeat before I get started with the presentation that I have for you, is that I really feel like Seattle is on the cutting edge of leadership, of fighting back against much of the ugliness that we see happening right now in this country. And it's hard when you live in a place that's doing that. It's hard maybe for you to have national context for what Seattle is doing right now. But from the court system on down, Seattle is fighting back in some of the most powerful and compassionate ways. And so I really see, and many of us around the country see, Seattle as being the tip of the spear, if you will, fighting back against a lot of ugly systems that are developing, and you play a real role in that. And so I really see Seattle as being on the cutting edge of fighting back against a lot of the ugliness, and solid ground is at the center of that. And so I'm honored to be here with so many compassionate people. And before you leave today, I hope to be able to teach a lesson. I hope you leave inspired, but in a lot of ways, I believe this is already a deeply inspired room. You are already motivated, and frustration is a form of inspiration as well. We are frustrated people. We are an inspired people. So I hope you leave with inspiration. But in the few minutes that I have, I want to teach a lesson about where we are as a country right now. I want to give some historical context for how we got to be in this peculiar place, because I think if we all better understood the seriousness of where we are, it would help us all grasp just how dire our commitment to social justice and change truly is. And so I have a presentation that I want to make, and some of you watched me last night on Facebook, because several of you told me that you watched me give a presentation that I spoke for about 3 hours. And so I don't know if you can hang with me for 3 hours, but they told me that I had like 20 more minutes. And so I'm going to squeeze all 3 hours into those 20 minutes. And so I don't mind if I see you on your phone taking notes or anything like that, that's fine. But let's jump right into it. And if I get the feeling that you're not fully in tune, I'll go for all 3 hours. I have no problem with that. And so if you can put the first slide up here. This is Leopold von Ranke. And he was an amazing historian in Germany in the early 1800s. An amazing historian. For many of you who are younger than 35, someone's not real until they have a Wikipedia page. And so he has a really descriptive Wikipedia page that you can check out later. But this is Leopold von Ranke, and he is seen as the father of the study of history. Before him, there was no way to get a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD in history. You could read books about the past, you could read books about history, but there was no academic discipline of history. And even though this was his passion and his specialty, he really had the thought that if history was going to be treated as a serious academic discipline, that it needed new standards, new guidelines, new principles. You could study economics, you could study chemistry or biology, you could study philosophy. But before Leopold von Ranke, you could not study history as a formal academic discipline. And he sought out to formalize that academic discipline. And it was Leopold von Ranke, almost 200 years ago, who began to shape and mold history as a discipline. And one of his biggest contributions to society was something that sounds so simple, but it's actually incredibly complicated. He decided he wanted to make a detailed, exhaustive timeline of human history. Now, you have to realize this is in the 1800s. This is not just pre-Google or pre-Wikipedia. This is pre-computer. For most of the world, it was even pre-literacy. It was pre-electricity. It was at a point in time where he was, most people knew very little about nations around them. You maybe knew your family history. you might have known the history of the town you were in, but very few people knew the history of the countries around them, particularly dating back for thousands of years. Are there any Walking Dead fans in the room? Walking Dead? Well, if you've ever watched The Walking Dead, you know that it takes place in Atlanta, but they have no idea what's going on in California, or they have no idea what's going on in Europe or Africa. They have no idea what's going on in South America, because all of the systems of communication to connect with the world are gone. There are no airplanes, there are no boats. Like, the ways that they connect with the world are gone. And so they live in deep isolation. So I'm not saying that in the 1800s it was like The Walking Dead, but almost. Like, it was like The Walking Dead with a few perks. And their connection to the world was very, very limited. And so Leopold von Ranke began creating this detailed timeline of human history. And the first thing that he did was he began assembling these amazing collections of biographies of every hero, every villain, every inventor, every creator, every artist, every musician, every president, every warlord, every person good and evil that he could find throughout history. He began assembling and collecting these biographies. Now, this is just a collage of faces that people put together. Like, I found Chewbacca up on here, and I don't know if you know who Rerun from What's Happening is, but I dare you to find Rerun up there. And I'm sad because when I speak at colleges and universities, when I point out Rerun from What's Happening, they have no idea who I'm talking about. But this audience is a little, college students have if I said find Rerun from What's Happening, they could be there hours later. Yeah, Susan found Rerun from What's Happening. And if you don't know Rerun, later, open up YouTube and type in Rerun What's Happening dance. And you have to see the dance that Rerun does, and it'll make your whole visit worth it this afternoon. Of course, Rerun and Chewbacca were not on Leopold von Ranke's timeline of human history, but as he began assembling all of these biographies and then putting them in chronological order, what he wanted to see is, if he studied the trends of history, would it prove or disprove what people knew about how history unfolded? If he laid them all out in deep detail, in chronological order, would the things that people assumed about how time worked, would they be proven true or false? And so he began collecting these stories. Not for a few months, not for a few years. It took him almost 35 years to collect thousands and thousands and thousands of facts about what had happened from the beginning of the world until now. Imagine, if you can look up at this graph, imagine that the bottom left-hand corner, not just the bottom left-hand box, but the bottom corner of the bottom box, that's early humans, okay? And imagine the top right-hand corner of the far bar is where we are today. And imagine this is a bar graph of all of humanity. What Leopold von Ranke found as he laid out all of human history in chronological order was that people were making a key mistake. And it really shook him up because it went against the common assumption that he made about how time worked. What he found was, I'm going to come down on the floor just for a second, okay? What he found was that it is true that technology over time is getting better and better and better and better and better and better. What he found was, if he looked over any 100-year period or any 1,000-year period, or certainly if he looked over 10,000 years of human history, our technology was steadily getting better. But what he found was people were confusing the steady improvement of technology with the steady improvement of humanity. That people would see gadgets get better and better over time. Think of the car. Think of the wheel. Think of mass production. Think of medicine. In his essays, he talked about the refrigeration of food and how for most of human history, if you killed an animal on Monday morning, you had to eat it by Monday afternoon or it would spoil. And he talked about we were finally finding ways to refrigerate food so they would not spoil. Think about any type of technology. Think about flight. I think about the telephone. I have 5 kids, but I have 2 teenage daughters, and I dropped one of my girls off at school, and I told her I did this. I told her to call me, right, where I put my thumb here and my finger here. And she said, Dad, like this is also like a surfer thing. I don't know what it means. But she said, Dad, when you said call me, why do you do the surfer symbol? I said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm saying call me. She said, what is this that you're putting on your face? I said, it's the phone. She said, what phone looks like that? Because for me, and for most of you in the audience, for the first 2/3 of our life, that's what a phone looked like. I'm old enough to remember that when there was one phone in our house, it was attached to the wall in my mother's kitchen. It had a long curly cord on the end of it. I remember the one that you had to dial. And I remember when technological advancement was when it went from dialing it like this to pushing the buttons. That technology advances over time. Now, literally, on our phones, this is why our kids don't understand my phones. Like, this looks nothing like the banana that I put on my face. Now, literally, my kids hardly use this for a phone. They use it for Snapchat and for, like, entire series of Netflix. That technology has changed, and what Von Ranke found was people would see the steady improvement of technology and also assume that humanity was getting better. But when he looked at humanity over time, this is a pictorial timeline of the history of London, when he would lay things out like this, the history of a country or the history of a city, what he found was the technology looked like this, but that the people look like this. That sometimes, listen, sometimes human beings were amazing. And I don't mean for a day. He found pockets of human history where there was very little war. And I don't even mean for a month, but years and years at a time, as he studied all of human history, he found periods of human history where there was very little famine, very little war, no colonialism. No, it was not perfection, but he found pockets of human history where people were collaborative and cooperative. And then he would move forward 100 years later, and it would seem as if human beings knew none of the lessons of the people who came before them. And then they would get a little better, and then they would crash. What he found was humanity looked nothing like this, where human beings are getting better and better and better and better. What he found was that humanity looked like this. A series of amazing peaks and tragic declines. And those declines, this is a graph, but those declines are about the quality of life that people experience. And I want to push this concept of how time works. Time does not work like this. There's something in us that wants to assume that we are getting it a little better than the people before us, and they made a few tweaks and got it better than the people before them, but that's not how it works. It works like this. And we are somewhere on this graph of peaks and valleys. If this is how time works, if we're steadily getting better and better and better and better, and that's us in the top right-hand corner right now, we're killing it. We are amazing. We are peak humanity. I won't tell too many Donald Trump jokes, okay? But I think Trump jokes play well in Seattle. I just do. If we are steadily getting better, and that's us in the top right-hand corner, how do we explain Donald Trump? Does that mean he is peak humanity? I don't think Melania believes he is peak humanity. I think she said, oh, you're moving to D.C.? I think I'll just stay right here. So the press is terrible. We desperately need you to move to D.C. She's like, nah, no, I'll stay right here. He is the gift that keeps on giving, in the sense that he says something, and at one moment I think it can get no worse than this. When a judge in my hometown of Brooklyn and a judge here in Seattle and a judge in a 3-judge panel in federal court ruled the immigration ban unconstitutional, he tweeted, right? He tweeted, "See you in court." And I had the thought, see who in court? Where you are losing so badly in court, that should be the last thing you tweet. He cannot, the point is, he cannot be peak humanity. That this is how time works. We are not experiencing the best there is. It's not where we are. Because if this is how humanity works, we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain this? This is the transatlantic slave trade. This is a diagram, for those of you who've never seen it, where someone wanted to determine how many human beings can I fit on this ship, because their specialty was the buying and selling and trading of human beings. And this practice in this form existed for 300 years. And here's what's wild. In the scheme of human history, if this bottom bar is early humanity and that final bar is close to where we are today, then this took place midway through the final bar. In the scheme of human history, this is brand new. So how do we, if we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain this, which lasted for 300 years? If we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain them? To this very day, there are surviving Holocaust members who are speaking out on the injustice they see happening across this country. If you have not done so already, I admonish you to follow the Anne Frank Center on Facebook and Twitter as they speak out and tell people that they see signs of things happening now that remind them of things that happened generations ago that produce this. There are Holocaust survivors in Seattle speaking out against this type of injustice that we see today. If we're steadily getting better, how do we explain this, which is Rwandan genocide, which happened when I was in middle school? Some of you were in high school or college or were in the workforce. This happened in our lifetime, where 1 million people were hacked to death in less than 90 days. We explain this because this is how time unfolds. Time is not, our technology is getting better and better and better, but humanity is not. We do not steadily improve with our gadgets. I wish that, like an iPhone, we had humanity 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, 8.0, 9. That's not how we work. But sometimes our gadgets are better and better and better, but we get worse and worse and worse. Last year, 102 fully unarmed black men, women, and children were shot and killed by American police. 102. These were not only people who did not have guns or knives. We removed from that number a man who had a broomstick and was shot and killed by police. There was a man in Mississippi who was shot and killed with a spoon. We removed him from that number. To give that number context, because it's hard to know where you are in history when you're living in it, this is the 25th president. Does anyone know who this is? It's McKinley. Who said McKinley? Good. How did you know that was? That's a great guess. How did you know that? Well, everybody else doesn't know that. Why do you know that is what I'm trying to find out. I'm glad you know it, but yeah, I love history too. That's President William McKinley. This is around 1900. He's the 25th president. That means that was 20 presidents ago. And the last year in this country that 102 or more African Americans were lynched, he was president. And what is lynching? What is the definition of that? Lynching is when someone is killed, sometimes suspected of a crime, and they face in one fell swoop judge, jury, and executioner. We would have to go back to 1902 to find the last year where 102 or more African Americans were lynched in this country. But that's how many people were killed by unarmed. Black men, women, and children were killed by American police last year. There are nations in this world that have not killed a single person in a decade. We live in the time. I want you to know the time we live in. The deadliest hate crime against African Americans in this country did not take place in the 50s or 60s. It took place when Dylan Roof walked into a Charleston church, shot and killed the pastor, sat through the entire Bible study, and killed everybody there. We live in the age of the deadliest hate crime in almost 90 years. We live in that age. And if we are steadily getting better, how do we explain this? If we're getting better and better and better and better, how do we explain this outrageous explosion in America's prison population? Where every study, and if you have Netflix, I admonish you to watch the documentary 13th. It's a powerful documentary. And in that documentary, Ava DuVernay, who produced it, could have called it The New Jim Crow, because a lot of the thought in that documentary is based on a book by a scholar, Michelle Alexander, called The New Jim Crow. And in that book, they explain that in about 1970, and they have quotes from Richard Nixon's director of policy, where they ask themselves, how can we criminalize blackness without actually saying that's what we're doing? And they said, well, let's find laws that we will only apply to African Americans. And when that was not enough, they said, what new laws can we create that we will only apply to African Americans? And here's the evidence. And you could Google this. If you Google Washington Post black-white drug disparities, you'll see an amazing study there. And it was a study from 1980 to 2010, which is the largest explosion on this graph. And in that study, they found that over 30 years of American history, that African Americans and Caucasians used drugs at the exact same rate, but that Caucasians actually sold drugs at a slightly higher rate, but that African Americans were prosecuted 800% more, thereby creating the stereotype that a drug dealer is young and black, when the truth is that's just who's being arrested and prosecuted. And that's what's responsible. And I have to tell people, this is not an accident. This is on purpose. People look at this and say, oh my God, the justice system is broken. And I say, no, it's not broken. This was built to function this way. This exists because we are in a dip right now in the quality of our humanity. In the way we treat one another. The latest budget from the White House is very much representative of the fact that we are in a dip in the quality of humanity. That hate crimes have increased for 8 years straight in this country. And here's the question: if this is true, that we are not at either of these peaks, but that we are somewhere in this dip, the question that I have for you is, what will you do to help us get out of it? What role will you play? I don't know if you've ever done this, but many times I have asked myself since my childhood, Who would I be if I was alive during the civil rights movement? I've just wondered. Would I march? Would I be a freedom rider? Would I protest? Would I sit in? Would I do that? And I think we've reached a point where we have a pretty clear answer of who you would be. Because we live in a time now that requires a similar effort from you. And the clearest indication of who we would be in 1963 or 1955 is sincerely who you were yesterday. What did you do yesterday to make a difference in the country that we're living in? Have you spoken out? Have you donated? Have you marched? Have you protested? Because if you want to know who you would be in 1955, the clearest indication is who you are right now. I'll close with this thought. Someone made this one for me. I made this one. You can see a bit of a quality decline here, back, forth, okay? The point will remain, okay? Several people have asked me, say, Shaun, let us fix that one, but now I just enjoy you seeing the difference. I'm keeping that slide. I'm closing with this one. We see a dip in the quality of humanity when there is an innovation that disturbs the primary people in power. That's when these ugly dips happen. I'll tell you about 3 examples. Giving a point from Atlantic Magazine. I did not know that Atlantic Magazine had been in continuous publication since 1858. And about 3 months ago now, they endorsed Hillary Clinton for president. And I encourage you to Google it and read their endorsement, because it's eerie seeing it now in retrospect. In their endorsement of Hillary Clinton, they started out by saying, we don't endorse presidential candidates. And that from 1858 all the way until now, they had only endorsed 2 candidates. One was Abraham Lincoln in 1860. And they republished their endorsement. And in the endorsement, they said, we believe that our nation is about to be split in 2, literally. And we feel that because of the way our nation is going, we must endorse Abraham Lincoln for president. They then waited 104 years before they endorsed another presidential candidate, until 1964. And they endorsed Lyndon Johnson. And their endorsement of Lyndon Johnson was very similar to their endorsement of Hillary Clinton. They said in their endorsement of Lyndon Johnson, which they republished, that they were not crazy about Lyndon Johnson, but that the president had just been assassinated. Kennedy had just been killed. And they said, we think, like we felt 104 years ago, that our nation has the possibility of being split in 2 on the issue of civil rights. And we believe Lyndon Johnson could guide us through that. And he did. It was Johnson who signed the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and 1965. And in their endorsement of Hillary Clinton, they said there were 3, I don't care about their endorsement of her as much as what their editorial board felt like looking over a broad view of history. They said there were 3 times in human history that shook Atlantic Magazine up to break their rule of endorsements. One was the Civil War. That makes sense, right? The other was the Civil Rights Movement. I get that. And the other was about 10 weeks ago. What's peculiar is when they endorsed a candidate in the Civil War, that candidate won. When they endorsed a candidate during the Civil Rights Movement, that candidate won. Now they feel that we are in a time that goes in line with those moments, and the candidate they endorsed lost. And what it says is, we are in a deeply problematic point in the history of this country. And when things get ugly now, oftentimes people say, oh my gosh, it feels like the 1950s. I think 50 years from now, when things get ugly, people are going to say, wow, it feels like 2017. That's where you live. That's when you live. And in each of these times, the Civil War, there was a deep innovation. It was the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment. And the KKK and lynching did not begin until after that innovation. So there was a deep dip. After the Civil Rights Movement, with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, there was a deep dip. It was mass incarceration. And now, if you look at that line before the dip, we tried something 43 times. 43 times, this country chose a white man as president. And then for the 44th time, we said, let's just change it up a little bit. And then we said, no. Let's just change it up a lot. It's not enough to elect a black man. Let's elect a black man named Barack Hussein Obama. Which you may not remember, it was very peculiar. I'm not even speaking about his politics. I'm speaking about his humanity. I have deep concerns about many of his policy positions. But his humanity made him very, very different. He was kind of from the South Side of Chicago, but he was also kind of from Hawaii. And he was also kind of African and kind of white. And his mother was a hippie from Kansas who moved them to Indonesia. So we said, hey, we've kind of done it one way 43 times. Let's just flip all of that on its head. And guess what? We introduced an innovation, a deeply innovative black man as president. And every year after he was elected, hate crimes increased in this country. Every single year. The innovation was his election. And we are living in the dip, the shadow of people who were very, very disturbed by that. It was exposed. I'll close with this thought. It was exposed very much this past week in a way that disturbed me. For 8 years, a political party ran on the idea that the most pressing thing to happen in this country was to repeal and replace Obamacare. And then they won the presidency, the House, and the Senate. And given the opportunity to repeal and replace it, they said, oh, no, we're okay. Never mind. They voted 62 times over 8 years to repeal it. And one of their congressmen, Tom Barton of Texas, said, he used this quote, which I was shocked by. He said that all those times that he voted against it, he said that was what he would call fantasy football. I was like, did you mean to say that? He said we always knew that President Obama would veto it. He said, but then this was not fantasy football. This time we knew if we voted for it, it would be signed. In other words, they really weren't so much against Obamacare. They were against Obama. It wasn't the care. Studies have proven it. You ask conservatives over the past 8 years, do you hate the Affordable Care Act? It was like 30% of them said yes. You ask those same ones, do you hate Obamacare? It went to like 75%. It's the same thing. The dip was in response to the innovation. But now it's become something all of its own. And living in this dip, we must ask ourselves, what do we do? How do we respond? Who do we give to? What contribution do we make? What role will we play? Because I promise you, this dip or this one, it can last for a few years, but sometimes dips last for decades. In the experience of the transatlantic slave trade, sometimes dips last for hundreds of years. And in this dip that we are in, we will not accidentally find our way out of it. There will not be one leader to save us. It apparently will not be Barack Obama, who appears to have taken up surfing and appears to love the sun so much that I don't even know if he's in the United States right now or if he's coming back. He has moved on. He has moved on completely. We will have to find our own way out of this dip. We'll have to do it together. It will have to cross every boundary, every political party, every ethnicity, nationality, every city and state. We'll have to find our way out of this together. I hope to be doing it with you, and I know that Solid Ground will be there providing the essential services for people no matter how low and ugly this dip gets. So continue to support them. Continue to love them. Thank you all so much.